I thought your hair turned white. The newspapers made a big deal out of it.
Oh, yeah? That's funny. That's just how I look when I'm totally free.
Oh, forget I asked.
What's up, everyone? Kane here, Captain of the Day's Pirates, coming at you with another matchup guide for our RP Luffy OP09 series, going through all the Nationals topping leaders. We've already done Dofi, we've already done Blackbeard. We got a queue of Bonney, followed by Black Yellow Luffy. Then we got Lucci. Then we got Shanks and Purple Luffy rounding out the Nationals topping leaders. And then we'll get into some of the other matchups that you guys have been asking for as well. So been appreciating the support very much, guys. Growing the channel has been an absolute blast, and continuing to kind of master this leader and share this information for y'all has been kind of challenging, but also just like a very rewarding process for myself. So if you're enjoying it, I try not to plug too early in the video, but we are closing in on that 500 threshold that we've been kind of talking about for a while. So if you're not subscribed, please do so. There will also be a link to our Discord. There will also be a link to this matchup guide series that we will continue to update. Once we kind of get the baseline of leaders, it's kind of easier to build on, but starting from zero, it's taking me some time to get it up and running. So I hope you guys have been appreciating this video form content. I am pretty interested in doing some maybe more written content as well, if you guys would like to enjoy that. But we'll just kind of follow the same template as the last guide. We're going to go into what Bonnie does, her deck list, and kind of a baseline of how it functions, some of the sideboard and tech options that she has, our kind of deck list and tools and tech options for her. Then we'll go into going first for second, mulligans, a curve, and kind of thought process as you're getting into the late game. And this is the deck that's going to grind. So if you're gonna beat Bonnie, it's gonna be a little bit of a longer game. Some of the games that we'll be going through at the end are a little bit longer. So we'll be a lot to talk about as far as how to approach this matchup. I definitely am not going to try and oversell about, hey, this is how you make this matchup easy. Walk in the park. We crush it every time, by any means necessary. But we do have some very strong tools. And if we're a better pilot than they are, we can still get the wins that we need to kind of progress in the tournament, right? So let's roll over into a deck list. If you're not aware what Bonnie does yet, she is a 5,000 power mono green leader. Therefore, she has 5 life. And once per turn on an opponent's attack, she can rest one down to rest one of her opponent's characters or leaders. She's a supernova Bonnie Pirates leader. She does kind of use all of the best supernovas that exist in the game. So this deck list that I do have here was from, I believe it was the 8th place player in the U.S. Nationals topping. So I'll be able to talk a lot about the baseline list and some of the cards that are in it, and then we'll go into some of the kind of sideboard and options that you'll see from other players and players that you might run into locals might be running, different iterations of this list. She is one that's a little bit more tinkered with than maybe, your Lucci's or Dofis, being a little bit more packaged, I guess you could say. Overall, though, she is a supernova leader and she does kind of lean on a supernova baseline. She is actually a relatively unique leader in the fact that she has 2 different searchable packages that work rather well. She is on 4 Jewelry Bonnies as well as 4 Baby 5 searchers as the Don Quixote family searcher or pirate searcher. Um, so for the Supernovas package, it's kind of anchored in this baseline of Cavendish. Cavendish is probably the best card in their deck or very close to it. Maybe not the best card in their deck, but it's very much an enabler to everything they want to do. It's on play and when attacking. If your leader's Supernova, and this is your only Cavendish, so you can't stack multiple of them, thankfully, stat up 2 of your Don cards is active. So if you play it for 5 Don, you basically only pay 3 because you get 2 back immediately, and then you can use that other 2 to do other things, use searchers, play searchers, whatever. Phenomenal mid-game play. At the top end of their Supernova package, they do also have this Eustace Captain Kidd that if you've been playing against really any green deck, you probably might see this hit this board. It's an 8 cost 8K that is a Don X1. When it's rested, if it has a Don on it, it has to be attacked. Before any leader, you can't attack any other rested characters or your opponent's leader until this is off the board. So it's kind of like makes them into an 8K leader in its own type of way. Obviously, it's a little bit more removable. In addition to that, it does just have an activate main to rest it and play your three cost or less from your hand. So they do package that with some of the blockers that are within this deck as well. The other kind of supernovas that they lean on are just a 2K package of the Scratch Mana Poo. This list has 6 of them. Some they might have a little bit more, or some do kind of trim on baby fives a little bit. But this person did just do very well at a nationals tournament, so hard to kind of argue with any of their decisions, in my opinion. But this is a Supernova's blocker that can be played off Eustace Captain Kidd, and it is a 2-cost 2K blocker with down X1 on block if you have 3 or more characters draw a card. So just great for defending that Eustace Captain Kidd. It can be played out if they're at 9 Don. They can play Kidd. Uh, well, they'd rather be at 10 Don, so they also have one active. But actually, even take it a step back, right? If they're at 8 Don, and then they play this Kidd, swing with Cavendish, they can put one of that active down on Eustace Captain Kidd, rest it to play out this killer. If they're a 9 down, they don't get to put a Don on killer for the effect, but they still get to play out the blocker. They can play out this Rosinante, which we'll talk about too. And then they still have an active Don to deny an attack. So you'll start to see how this deck is all about kind of freezing and manipulating your opponent's characters to uh, kind of ink out advantage through that. It's kind of like a more extreme example of Shanks' ability if you've been playing in Shanks recently. Beyond that, I think that's kind of all the supernovas, but they're all great ones, right? Kind of this package is amazing for the deck list. And I think these two killers are also sometimes a different blocker, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. For the Baby 5 Don Quixote package, they have a 2K counter package of a couple of the Violas and Baby 5. And then also the 0 cost counter in green is Don Quixote type, so that's searchable for them as well. And then they have this 10 cost Doflamingo, which on play, they get to choose 3 characters or including your leader, and they do not refresh on your next refresh phase. So they do not become active. So that is extremely strong control. Again, if you think about some of the play lines that might come up, if you play out your Newgate and make your leader 8K, and then you swing with your leader, they can rest one Don to rest down your Newgate, and then they can play this Don Quixote, Doflamingo, and freeze it. So you basically never even get to attack with it, or you're not going to be able to attack with it for at least one more turn, which can be extremely strong and very effective in delaying us into the later game. Being able to remove these 10Ks used to be one of the reasons why some people did play Shanks on our list, which I will circle back to as well. But between the 2Ks, Doflamingo, and then also this other 2 cost blocker that's extremely strong, this Rosinante, 2 cost, 1K counter, or well, 1K counter as well, 1K blocker, that is on opponent's turn, if one of your other rested characters would be KO'd, you may instead trash this character. So if they play out like their 8 cost Kidd and this, and they try to KO Eustace Captain Kidd with like anything, I don't know, Ice Age Jack, it they can instead kind of functionally block with Rosinante, and he sacrifices in his way in that way. So really solid for this deck list, and it just synergizes so well with Eustace Captain Kidd at the exact same time. So this deck list really likes this card, and it's searchable. So that's one of the reasons why this Doflamingo package is so effective alongside the Supernovas package. And then to that end, these are rest searchers, so they can do it every turn if you're not swinging into them. So that's one thing we'll talk about on the curve is prioritizing getting these blockers off the board, and then also at some point just kind of having to make tough decisions, kind of like we talked about with Lafitte. There is a point in the game where it's just no longer worth committing, a 6K swing into it. But we'll get more into that. Beyond that, they do have a few other amazing kind of flex spots. Kind of the only cards that aren't searchable in their entire deck are Hody, which they're on 4 of. Hody is a 7 cost rush character on play. Rest up to 2 of your opponent's characters and or Don. That Don part is going to be very important as we talk about Gum Gum Giants and how we play around them. This Hody is part of one of the reasons why, another one of the reasons why Bonney is considered one of RP's Luffy's counters to some degree, because this can turn off your Gum Gum Giants and a blocker and just completely disrupt you if you're not playing very hard around it or not ready to counter out of a Hody onslaught. Carrot. I think they really love this card for like manipulating Doflamingo, especially right now. But this card is very good into us as well, to some degree. It is on play when attacking, 5 cost, 6K, 1K counter. Up to one of your opponent's rested 7 cost characters do not become active during its owner's next refresh phase. So similar to what I just mentioned with the Doflamingo, if you play out a 7 cost Eustace Captain Kidd as RP Luffy, and then swing with your 7K leader, Bonney uses 1 down to rest down your Eustace Captain Kidd, play out a carrot, and they develop a 6K body that can keep your Eustace Captain Kidd from never attacking again until this character is removed from the board. Very strong. And then Shanks, the top end threat that they really, if this was searchable, they would be in an insane place right now. If they could search Hody and or Shanks right now, which they're going to be able to in EBO2, right? So that's something to think about. But this Shanks is a straight up 9 cost, 11K body, which is a great over the top body for them. They didn't have anything bigger than Doflamingo, and even Doflamingo is their only thing that's above 9. And then now they have this 11K that says on play, K up to one of your opponent's rested characters. Period. No restriction on that. So again, you play out a new gate, they rest it, they KO it, and now tempo's back in their court. Very effective for them. I think another one of the reasons why I do kind of think we want to take them off of 10 Don and go, well, we'll get into that, but I do think I want to go second into them. Maybe I should kind of start going through that part of it, or at least that baseline, before I go into the deck list. I don't know. If you guys have been liking this format, let me know. I think it's been working pretty well. But yeah, so that's kind of the core package. Again, this person got 8th at National U.S. Nationals a couple weekends ago. Some of the kind of other tech options or cards that you might see that might be relevant, or you maybe I wouldn't be shocked to see personally. This carrot I have seen before. This one's definitely a little bit less common than some of the others, but she is just another 2K, and she's a 5 cost 5K. The end of your turn stands up 1 Don. She's very similar to this Arouge character, which is a supernova searchable 4 cost blocker that stands up 1 Don at the end of the turn. As you saw in my previous list, there wasn't one. I see a lot of Bonney players cutting it. If you play Bonney and you can explain to me why that is, please do so. I don't personally get it, but I don't mind it either. maybe it's just worse for me than it is for other decks. Maybe it's just because Law can bounce it. But that card's a pain in my butt, so I'm kind of glad that they're cutting it largely as well. I guess I'll just kind of roll through a couple of the supernovas, and then I'll circle back to that Rosinante just because I can. Jewelry Bonney is a 5 cost on play. You can either keep frozen a rested character or a rested Don. 1K counter, Bonney supernova searchable. And one thing that's noteworthy with the rest searchers is they are not name restricted, so a Bonney can find a Bonney, worth noting. So I'm kind of again a little bit surprised they don't play this card. I think it's maybe worse into RP Luffy than it affects other leaders. Like in one of my games, you'll see I think Teddy does like freeze my Don, so I don't get to play a 9-drop, and that's kind of annoying. But not everyone runs it. Hawkins. This card I think is maybe fallen off because of the way Blackbeard works and just kind of the current meta, I suppose. Because Basil Hawkins is a 6 cost 7K blocker because this is a supernova leader. And then once per turn, it cannot be removed by opponent's effects if it can instead rest one of your opponent's characters. I guess the other problem with this is that Doflamingo can swing its whole board, then gravity blade it away once all his board is sideways. Bartolomeo is a supernova blocker, 3 cost 4K. If a character is rested from your effects, draw 1 card, then trash 1 card from your hand. So that includes like rest searchers or anything else. I think it's just kind of fallen off in favor of the killer being more consistent actual draw instead of draw 1, trash 1. And then also this Capone Beige being a 1 cost 7K blocker. Or 1K, sorry, I was looking at the next card. 1 cost 1K blocker. It has no counter, but it's just a little bit easier to throw in there alongside or in addition to, Rosinante or your Kid. The 7 cost Eustace Captain Kidd blocker, I did see in another one of the Nationals topping list. I had never seen this card before that, but it is a 7 cost 7K blocker with down 1 end of your turn, set this card as active. I think I saw someone talking about it in the Nationals or the LATAM tournament as well, maybe. Or maybe that's where I saw this 7-cost kid. And basically, they were saying that a little bit of the thought process was being able to be a little bit more aggressive. And it's also just immune to Gravity Blade, which is kind of, it's not immune to all the other removal like Hawkins is, but it doesn't get Gravity Bladed, which obviously Doflamingo is very present. The two Doflamingo, or I'm sorry, Don Quixote pirate cards I want to go through is one Rosinante being an 8-cost. Opponent's turn, if this character is rested, your active characters with original cost of 5 cannot be KO'd by effects. And then on play, you may rest this character, play up to one green character with a cost of 5 from your hand. So I thought this card was going to kind of catch a little bit more traction going into this new set, but I think Eustace Captain Kidd being very important for their matchup with Doflamingo being very important. But what we've talked about here, they have Cavendish is a phenomenal 5-drop that's searchable. Bonney is a very good 5-drop that's searchable. Carrot is a very good 5-drop that's searchable. And then you'll see in some of the games with Teddy as well, he's playing this Doflamingo as a searchable 5-drop blocker as well for the Baby 5 package that is a 5-cost 6K blocker that's also, if you have 2 or more rested characters in play, set this character active at end of turn. So just kind of able to be a little bit aggressive and then restand it and so on. And then also with the Rosinante, it can be played out and protected with the Rosinante. So I think this is maybe a little bit of tech that's being overlooked, or maybe other Bonnie pilots have kind of moved past it. Again, if you maybe know why you're not playing this card as a Bonnie pilot, you can let me know. But I think there's definitely something there. Then jumping over into kind of RP Luffy and the list that a lot of my games will be representing, and then also just kind of some of the tech options and things that you can do into this matchup. So overall, like we've mentioned with the Eustace Captain Kidd and Newgates, they are still pretty good in this matchup because you do want to buff up above that 6K bodies into some of their larger bodies. Being able to be a stronger leader is good, but the play patterns of being cognizant of Carrot freezes and Doflamingo freezes is something to think about within your play patterns. 100%, it's worth getting that extra like slightly less counter or slightly less pressure if you get a swing out of your Newgate or Kidd the next turn. Um, your blockers can be very good. The double queen play is kind of bait in this matchup because if you play queen into queen and leave one down open, or you just like queen into Nami and leave 2 down open, that's a little bit better because then if they Hody, they rest both your blockers. So if you do have those events, then you're in pretty good shape. But if you don't have the events, then that bluff is, only so good. But it's also something too with this Sanji blocker or Sanji rusher being able to rest their blockers so that you can chip into their life, especially if they are playing Hawkins. You can kind of push past a Hawkins to take them down to 1 or 0, so that then if they play out a Hody or if you take them down to 0 naturally, you can then get in on them with a Roger. Again, this matchup is very tough for us. If you're going to win it, you're going to have to kind of grind out with them. So the other things that you can do, this 9-cost Monkey D. Luffy is very, very good for this matchup because of the card economy, helps us grind out with them. It's a 9-cost 10K, so it's hard for them to swing into. Obviously, Shanks can still snipe it immediately, but you get that value out of swinging it immediately, so that's pretty good. More rush is just also good if you want to play more Sanjis. Again, Beckman in this matchup, I think, is one of the most powerful. Like, if I was playing at a locals where I'm gonna see like 2 Bonnie players and 2 Betty players there out of like 15, 16 people every week, I might play 4 Beckmans. Beckman being able to immediately answer that Cavendish, immediately answer um that Karasu, or immediately check a blocker, can just better than a kid on curve in sometimes some of those matchups that are going to grind out a little bit more. Um, with that, I did mention there was a couple of tech cards I wanted to mention. I mean, every time if we're talking about, more rush, this is a matchup that dragons are fairly good into. This is one where Shanks, oh, that was the other one, was Shanks. The rush Shanks will be pretty good here for you as well. That's also very nice for checking into those 8-cost kids. What I was going to say with this matchup is that in 7 and 8.5, I was playing and toying around with this Shanks quite a bit because of this matchup. I still end up cutting it, obviously, if you've been tracking my videos and deck lists. But this Shanks being able to answer their Doflamingo or Kid or Hody immediately is just nice. And then it allows you to establish a 12k swinger for future turns. But also, this is a matchup where if you're seeing a lot of Bonnies, a lot of Luchis, you're kind of seeing more like the 8 meta before Dofi came around. The Shanks economy does start to come back up. But kind of in the short term, like I said, I want to take second from them, and then I want to go Beckman on turn 3 to answer whatever 5 drop they played, a 9 drop on the following turn. It's kind of chain out and grind out with them from there. So that I think that hits all the card options. One card that I do kind of miss, and once we get into OP10, I think I'm going to be testing with this again. I have one of my very early videos. I got a very fun win over a bounty player because they were swinging into me with their kind of final lethal, and I had a beam sword in hand. And this is a 2 cost counter down -1, 2k buff to your leader or character, and then rest up to one of your opponent's characters. There's no restriction on what character you rest. So just very good 2-for-1 that like I've gone where they want to swing like 6 into me. I play 2, and then you rest of their Doflamingo, and they just lost a 10k swing, and you 2k'd out of that swing. Um, right now, Gum Gum Giant kind of makes it a little bit harder and where the current deck is. Um, but I really do like this card, and I do kind of miss playing it. And it's pretty gnarly for the Bonnie matchup. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about like hard playing around Hody and how important that can be. Um, but yeah, those are kind of our best tech choices. Being able to go a little bit more rush heavy is definitely favorable, especially when supported by the Beckmans that can answer Cavendish. If you can check that Cavendish immediately, that can make the entire difference in a game. And I really don't think I really don't think I'm overstating that. So let's pivot over into going first versus second. I've already kind of alluded to some of it. We are going to touch back on 2 tech choices that I did kind of overlook in my initial recording. So kind of like it's the die for section for the Dofi matchup guide. We are going to cut back in here with Silver's Rayleigh. He's an 8 cost 8k on play. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, one of their characters gets -3k, the other gets -2k, and then after this, you KO one of their 3k or less characters. So it can answer immediately a 6 cost character or a 5 cost character, or I'm sorry, 6k power character or a 5k power character. And while answering one of those 2 things, he can also nerf the attacks of another character. So you could say they have a Cavendish and a Doflamingo on board. You can play Rayleigh, KO the Cavendish, and make the Doflamingo into an 8k power, or nerf a Hawkins down to 5, or a Eustace Captain Kidd down to um, 5 or 6. Or you can minus the Kid, minus something else, and KO the small blocker that's less than 3k without a minus effect. So again, if you're at a local where there's a lot of Bonnies, and maybe this isn't a bad choice against Dofi and some other decks as well. It's a little bit bad against it's probably worst against Blackbeard, so that's something to be cognizant of. But just being an 8 cost 8k body that kind of manipulates your opponent's attacks as well as KOing something is very good for this matchup, as we mentioned. Clean removal is very good for this. On a similar vein, one of the reasons that I used to run Nico Robin, besides being an absolute simp for her, is the fact that she KOs their searchers and she KOs their Rosenates. So it is a 1 cost, 2k power, 1k counter, Straw Hat Pirate, Nico Robin, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 1000 power or less. So some synergy with in corner cases with Rayleigh. So I used to play Rayleigh and Robin. Robin just being able to snipe their, like I said, their searchers, So sometimes if they go first, they'll just play a searcher and not rest it, right? Turn 2 now, you play out the Nico Robin and remove the searcher before they even get to use it. Massive. Or later, you answer a Rosinante for 1 down. Very, very good. Searchable, 1K counter. She's perfect. Robin's perfect. We all know that. So those are just the 2 cards I did want to kind of shout out. Again, if you're seeing a lot of Lucci's and Bonnies, if you're seeing, a lot of Lucci's and Bonnies at locals, 1 or 2 Nico Robins is going to take you very far. To some extent, Sanji kind of answers similar problems, but immediately actually just answering it on play right then, very, 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 very strong. So from here, we'll go into going first versus second, actually, but I did want to kind of just add this piece in for y'all. All right, so going first or going second here, it's admittedly tough. Again, I'm not trying to oversell, but this matchup is suddenly going to be a walk in the park by the end of this video. But I think going second does a couple things, right? It takes away 1 card, might matter. It does delay their 10 cost Doflamingo by a turn, which again can make a massive difference. Now that they have the Shanks too, it's a trade-off, right? Whether they're freezing versus KOing. Doflamingo is searchable though, right? From a consistency point. Also to this point, the trade-off going second, in my opinion, is that usually, or depending on how the player is kind of navigating it, it is harder to answer searchers when you go second, because on turn 1 they're going to play out their searcher for 1 down, leave it standing up. You're going to go to your 2 down. You ideally play a Nami. If you don't play a Nami, that's even more awkward. But if you do play a Nami, well, I guess that's kind of the thing, is if you do play a Nami, then they're on 3 down. They use 1 down to activate their searcher. They use 1 down to attach their leader and swing into us for 6K, getting a counter out of our hand or a life from us. And then they also have 1 down open for your leader effect, so that if you try and swing into um, the searcher with your Nami, they rest down your leader and you lose that leader swing. And I've even had people like where I tried to do that and not really like thinking too hard, and they rest my leader and then they 2K out the swing on Nami. I'm like, oh no. But like you just have to swing the leader in at that point. They rest the Nami, they swing into the Nami. It's a little bit annoying. Also, if you like you're Mr. Two, you want to and Zorajura, both of which, if they're leaving down up, you want to make sure you're swinging before you play them out, obviously. But where the upside comes in, and especially if, like I said, if you're leaning into Beckman's because you are, being conscious of Bonnie, their 5 down turn, they want to play Cavendish. That's their best 5 down turn in the entire game. It's really good for them. It allows them to swing 6K and leave open leader effect, or search and leave open leader effect, and it's a 6K body. And it opens up more aggressive play lines with Hody on 7 down. And it is really good with their Shanks on curve, their Kid on curve. Their like Cavendish is insane for them. So one, we need to prioritize swinging into it given the opportunity. So keep note of that. But also, um, having just that Beckman to immediately answer it. 7 cost Sanji can rest it, but if they have that leader effect open, you're only getting a 7K swing in, and if you have something else, it's just not going to answer it as consistently. So that trash effect immediately, and then go into your 9 drops the next turn can be just the entire difference in keeping the advantage that you need. Beyond that, getting a Newgate out ahead into their useless Captain Kid on 9 down. Newgate can be one of the only things that really effectively answers a kid, because you can put 2 down onto that Newgate, swing in, KO the small blocker that they played off the kid, and then also it's a 12 into an 8, which demands 3 cards from your opponent at that time. So again, that's another utility where, yes, Newgates kind of are not as good into Bonnie on the surface level. However, that secondary effect, it can actually be the entire difference maker in getting through a kid wall or not. Then beyond that, just having more rush characters just helps. I've already kind of alluded to that with some of the tech and things there. And then again, going first is fine. You just play out your Zoro, maybe your Zoro and Nami get an opportunity to help you kind of check into the searchers. If they play multiple searchers, it can be pretty annoying. So yeah, we'll run from here into going first mulligans, and we'll talk about our curve up the way. All right, we are going first against Bonney. At the time of recording this, I'm still kind of trying to decide whether we want to go first or second, really. Some of the testing I want to do around that a little bit. This matchup's obviously tough. Let's see. Let's say we're going first. Grip a couple hands here. I'm keeping this. Being able to just go ramp on 3 into turn 4 9 drops is what we want to be doing, right? Not being able to answer early bodies like with anything besides just swings is a little unfortunate, but turns out probably all right. It's a little bit slow, but this matchup isn't going to be a pressure race, so I'm not that concerned with it. If you take that Yasop swing, actually that's just counter because we have the turn 3 Mr. 2. That's an easy keep. Let's run it back. Going first again. Looking good. Yeah. Great curve. Can't really complain about that, right? We're going to search. Roger's Last Life is beautiful. Turn 1 we search. Guess we grab a 2K. Turn 2 we draw and play Zoro. And we're off to the races. With those new gates, you know, depending on board state, might be better to, you know, swing before or after you play them, depending on what you're trying to play around on that curve. That is one of the upsides of going first, is even if we're still beating them to 10 by a whole turn, generally speaking, or at least we're getting our 9 drops out before they get to 10 still. So our 9 down 10 turn goes into their 8 down turn if we're ramped, which is good. This one, I might mulligan that, honestly. If we get that out of life, that's not too bad, but we don't have a threat. Oh, we do have a Beckman. I think this hand might be pretty slow. We'll probably get grinded out by a good Bonney, if I had to guess. If they play through Cavendish and we're able to answer with Beckman immediately, and then, you know, play through our kid or something, might have a shot. But I might send that one back. And that's another one where, like, technically going first, right? We've talked about before how going first, you are supposed to indicate first whether or not you're going to mulligan or not, even though, you know, it's not necessarily enforced. So if your opponent's going second and they snap keep, might be worth sending that one back. You know, whereas if you don't have that information, it's a little bit harder to make that decision. Double searchers, I'm probably going to just keep. Get to play turn 1 and turn 2 Nami. With the 9 costs and some of our other 7 costs being searchable, Namis are just better than ever. And then also Sanji's pretty decent in the matchup, so, you know, turn 1 we'll search. We'll get a Zoro, actually, so we probably won't search on turn 2. Turn 2, draw Zoro anyways. And then, yeah, play through that rest of that curve up to Sanji, or I guess we'd probably draw the Beckman, which is pretty good. Then search up either. It's kind of tough to bottom a giant, but if we want the threat, it kind of depends on where the board state's at. And let's see, one more. Bump my stand there. And last one. I'll just keep that. Again, we don't have like our hard top end, but I really, really like Beckman for this matchup, as we'll talk about and probably see in the games. And then also just got some counter and a little bit of cycle. I guess this would be our life, right? Not too bad. All right, good stuff. So let's go in first, mulligans. Got some pretty good hands there overall. So we found a keepable hand. We have a Nami and a Zoro, so that's going to be our turn 1 and turn 2. Ideally, we're getting in on any searches that they leave vulnerable. And this is where I have actually, I guess I haven't mentioned so far that the way that your opponent min maxes their leader effect can be a big difference too. Like I do think like we have to assume, or I'm going to make most of these matchup guides assuming your opponent is playing rather efficiently. However, they can very easily kind of bait themselves into thinking, oh, one turn off lead effect isn't that big of a deal. But really, they need to prioritize against them. In my opinion, against us, they really need to prioritize having that leader effect available to them, unless they're absolutely dominating us on the board. And then at that point, it probably doesn't really matter, I guess. But almost always, where I find myself kind of beating people out incrementally is where they're taking just 1 or 2 turns off from lead effect. It's letting me chip away at those cards in the way that I need to, and then I can get in the later game. So that's one thing to kind of be mindful of if they're searching a little bit aggressively, or in the early game not protecting those searchers, get in on them. Later on, that's another reason why we talk about answering Cavendish and getting Cavendish off board being so important. Is later on, once they play in their 9 cost and 10 cost characters, those searchers are garbage unless they have a Cavendish. So again, just like Lafitte, once you get up to that top end of the curve, yes, you're getting advantage from being able to play that searcher. But when it takes away from your best play lines that can be available to you, um, it's worthwhile to to press face at that point. So that is something to consider as well. Um, with that being said, this is a great example. If you go first and they rest all their Don on their turn 2, so they use all 4 of their Don, searching and swinging or whatever they do, your Zoro attack being able to go for that 7 and then 9 cadence is amazing. Get that pressure, get that life, get that counter. If you have a Nami, get in with that as well. I guess if they have a searcher or whatever, then you're probably hitting that. But this is also part of the reason why I don't fully understand why they're cutting Arujas, because the turn 2 Aruj is just such a pain in my ass. But hey, I'll take it. Similar case if they you didn't get a Zoro, developing your Mr. 2 is fine. If you get a Yasop, you're going into their 6 down turn, so a carrot might freeze your Yasop if you swing with your leader at 7k. Again, so if they rest out all their down, this is a very great opportunity for you to capitalize on that. Again, going into turn 4, if they start swinging with Cavendish or even Carrot, it might be worth trying to commit some Don. This is where 9-cost Luffy can be phenomenal, or Dragon can be really good. You swing leader into their face, they probably block or counter or whatever, rest whatever you have on board, and then you use your Dragon or your 9-cost Luffy to rush into one of these 6k bodies and pick them off the board. And then again, we've kind of already talked about a 9-cost Newgate on board as soon as possible can absolutely halt their momentum that they can gain from an 8-cost kid hitting board in just a way that no other card can, because we can 2-for-1 that blocker that they're creating. Another way you can do that, if you already have a big swinger on board, Sanji can help you manipulate that, or Usohachi can help you manipulate that. Newgate just being kind of that 2-for-1 on board, though, can be absolutely perfect. Let's roll over into some going second mulligans here.
All right, going second now into Bonney. I think if we do hit Mr. 2 or even Zoro, because they don't really have ways to remove it on curve, going second might just be a little better because it does let us immediately answer their 5 drops with Beckman's. Yeah, I think I keep this, and then, turn 3 we're either playing through the Queen or the Sanji, and grinding out all right. Draw for turn 1, draw for turn 2, got some counter, something to pitch to Giant later, depending on how it plays out. A Beckman's nice. Yeah. I do think, I mentioned this in the RP Luffy discussion thread the other day before recording this, that I do kind of think if I was like at a meta where there's a lot of Bonnies and maybe even a lot of Bettys as well, I'd probably be on maybe even up to 3 Beckmans. In the list that I have here, I do have 3 Ben Beckmans in it, kind of a little bit teched for Bonney, quite honestly. I think just being able to check a Cavendish on curve or just along the way is amazing. And then also there's some other stuff, things to trash as well. But I think most specifically, we tend to get grinded out very hard when there's a Cavendish available to them through their Dofi turns and things like that. So another hand going second here. I think I'd keep that. Maybe, especially if they mulliganed, I think I'd definitely keep this. If they, because we're going second, right? So if they snap keep, no, I think this is just pretty good to keep. This can be our 7-drop turn to make us a 7K leader still, and then we get to play through our Newgate and Franasoke. So if we do keep that, again, Roger Last Life is beautiful. We do have Sanji, but we're not going to take that too early. Turn 1 draw, Turn 2 draw, play out this. Turn 3 draw, either counter, there's our other Roger. Yasop, and then we're on to 9-drop. So weave in a Roger to check a Eustace Captain Kidd, depending on where they're at. A couple 2Ks. So it might be a little tough, depending on how they curve out and what threats they hit. That 7-drop. And that's kind of why I have a hard time, or I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to go first or second. That's one thing I got to figure out before finishing posting this. But either way, we're going second in this example. But our first curve is just a little bit more consistent, and I think we kind of need that. But if we do get to go second and hit a Beckman, that's almost better than hitting a Kidd, really, in my opinion. A Eustace Captain Kidd, not a child. Going second, 2 Surgers, and we'll just keep that. I guess I need to give this a real good shuffle real quick. Draw for turn. That's a great draw for turn. Double search. That's not the best search, but it's fine. I might grab a giant Luffy there, even though we're bottoming a giant in the process. At this point, we've already played out. Boop, boop, boop. That's a 7-drop, I think, on curve, because that was our 2 searches. Yeah, so we get the 7-drop Beckman on curve, and then get to play through our 9 drops, which is pretty good. All right, one more hand, going second. This is a matchup where you shouldn't have to overtly prioritize counter early, but if they do play Cavendish and really put pressure on, you can definitely want some counter, right? But usually it comes a few turns down the line, so between Namis and draws, you can kind of correct it out. In this matchup and this list that I'll be playing for some of the games today, I did cut my 1 of Gum Gum Giant and kept in my 1 of Franasoke. We are mulligan in that hand, in case you're wondering. Because Hodes, rest Dom, so kind of knowing that I'm going into that matchup today, I do think cutting the 1 of Rad Beam is probably a good idea. Maybe at least until we get access to 5-cost Rose and Ate. That obviously changes some of the math with these things, but... So we mulligan, so we're forced to keep this hand. Good cut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm... Last Life Roger keeps coming up. Not mad at that hand off a mulligan, really. Draw for turn. Boom, we got a curve now. Yeah, well, I guess if you just rip your curve off the top of your deck, that's fine too.
Yep. So we've kept our dream hand. We got turn 2, Mr. 2, turn 3, Beckman, and we are off to the races. But actually, though, some of the things that I have already kind of mentioned, you're probably not going to want to. It's actually one thing you can do with the searcher is you can try and be cheeky and play out your Mr. 2 and then swing Nami into their searcher and then see if they want to rest Mr. 2 instead of resting your leader. Kind of cheeky cute. Relatively speaking, though, probably just do your swings before you play out your Mr. 2, including swinging out that searcher immediately. Again, if they rest all their Don, it's a great opportunity to kind of do both, right? Usually, if you play out that Nami, especially, they're gonna kind of make sure that that searcher functions as a blocker for them, which is pretty good and annoying. Something that is worth mentioning too, they will sometimes just drop some of these small blockers along the curve. Again, that's kind of just good for us if they're not playing their curve and they're not searching and they're just kind of playing out a little blocker early that we might be able to snipe or they might use a little value for. It's fine. I don't know. It's not the end of the world. It is kind of nice knowing how many blockers they run. That if you're on a kind of a Roger backup plan, you might be able to secure something behind, a Hody or after some pressure that you get through. And then again, with them on their odd curve, if they play a Cavendish, especially if you don't KO that Cavendish, they're going to go Cavendish into Hody and then have down up for leader effect, probably, and that's very good for them. But if you answer that Cavendish, that tempo Hody becomes significantly worse, which they might still go for it, but it's just way worse for them in that exact position. Another scenario where it should be pretty good, but I don't know. Beyond that, their 7 down is a little bit awkward for them right now if they're not, especially if they're not on Hawkins, which they probably just play out another 5 cost. Maybe they replace that Cavendish that we just KO'd and we're a little annoyed by it. Um, to that end too, where we said with this being our kind of preferred positioning, where you can lose a lot of values if you do play that carrot, then it gets frozen by carrot and you don't have a good way to check that carrot immediately. And then again, 9 cost chains. If you ramp once, your turn 4 is going to be 9 cost when they are on going into their 9 cost turn, so they cannot Hody immediately, or they cannot Dofi immediately. Still, they can go directly into a Shanks, but that's not searchable again, as we mentioned. And from here is kind of that board control tussle just a little bit until you can get pressure down on life. And I do think Sanji, that 7 cost Sanji, being able to rest their blockers and their Hawkins in particular can help you set up lethal opportunity. And one thing I've been kind of I guess tiptoeing around, or I'll try to hard highlight within the games as well, is playing around Hody, right? We've talked about like the fact that that card rests 2 Don or characters. So you can manipulate this math a lot of different ways, but you need to be cognizant of that. And actually, I think I'm going to maybe outline that a little bit more in the own slider on kind of the final punches slide, talking about Hody and how you can kind of play around that. But that's something to be very mindful of in the late game. If you're going into a potential lethal situation or Dofi stall turns and kind of managing that thought process, I'm gonna try and break that down in the games because it's a hard wire to balance. But yeah, let's go into kind of that finishing, that finding those final punches and what hits we take. As we're going for these closeouts and as we get into these longer games, the games that we're gonna win and really just the Bonnie in general makes for longer games. Realistically, you're gonna grind out. It's gonna come down to counter. It's gonna come down to board management. Um, into those later turns, more than other leaders, I'd say, removing their 6K bodies can be very valuable for us, especially as into the later game as we develop counter or blockers and hold open our counter events. Removing their Cavendishes, their carrots, can absolutely make a world of difference, almost a bigger difference than like removing like a Doflamingo or a Hody after it's on the board. Like their on players are very strong, but um, that recurring value of a Cavendish, and especially when they have a Cavendish, and then in the late game if they are untapping, play a Hody, then they swing with Cavendish. They have 5 Don to disperse among their board, and it's just a lot of pressure. Um, that's one thing too with this is I'm really going to emphasize in the gameplay is how playing around Hody, it rests 2 things, right? So making sure that you have access to your giants no matter what can often be more valuable than getting 1 or 2 more Dom into your attacks or playing 2 queens. Like being able to recycle your hand, not getting awkwardly pressured, because sometimes it's not even going to be, it can be a Hody and then they aren't going to kill you, but they're going to swing 8K, 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 and if you can just go down to 0 life out of nowhere sometimes. So being very cognizant of what damage a Hody could do to you in any given turn is math that you need to very much be aware of. It's 7 Don. You'll have 3 Don left over unless there's Cavendish to add to that math, and they're bored. What is a good player gonna try and kill you? Is a good player gonna math you out because they know your hand size and they know you have a giant or two because you searched them? So I'm going to try and emphasize that as I go through the games, but be just kind of being aware of that and trying to live through a Hody can be very important. As we mentioned earlier too, any turns where they do not have their leader effect active, let's get our value while we can. Rip at their hand or their life. Make it awkward for them. Make it 7, 8s, 9s. Hit them. Um, if they leave their leader effect down and I don't have a great turn, I'm gonna use Nami to get in for an extra counter as well. You know, that kind of stuff. Clean removal is their downfall, right? Bonnie has a good matchup into a lot of decks, but what deck it's always struggled with is Lucci because it just removes stuff, right? So Beckman, as I've emphasized multiple times over, again, if I'm in a meta where I'm really afraid of the Bonnie at my locals or the 3 or 4 Bonnie players of trash in my locals, I might go back to playing 2 Rayleighs. Honestly, again, Rayleigh answering a Cavendish is phenomenal, and minusing something else while it does it is amazing. Or minusing some things and removing a blocker so that you can swing into a new gate. I should have mentioned Rayleigh earlier. Rayleigh is a great tech choice. I actually might go edit that in as well. Um, and then once we get Divine Departure in OP10, that's a counter event that also has built-in removal. That's going to be very good for this matchup as well. That's how you push past advantage. They glean a lot of advantage from making you swing into characters that, especially when they're bigger than their leader or they just don't care. Like the Searcher, they're not going to counter, right? It's like a blocker. Or if it's a 6K, it kind of makes them into a 6K blocker or 6K leader, and they 2-for-1 us because they remove another attacker at the same time. So clean removal, spot removal, that Beckman just, you play a 9 cost, you play a 9 cost, or you play a 9 cost, they Cavendish, you Beckman it can be insane. Um, Again, if you do kind of drop shields down, you get a little bit passive with Hody and the damage that it can do to you. It might just kill you, right? It will just take you to 0. It might catch you off guard. Um, so play around that. Be mindful of it. Play 1 blocker and leave open 3 down. Stuff like that. And then same thing too, when you do challenge their 8 cost kid, make it as hard as possible. If you can get those blockers out of the way first, so they don't even have availability to them, and then pressure with I like to go 12K into them as much as possible between, either 9 cost Luffy or I mean obviously 9 cost Luffy, yeah, you can go 10 costs of all year down. But if you have a new gate, you can remove like a blocker, like we've talked about, or a searcher while you do it. But I really like to swing in 12K into their kids so that at least takes 3 cards out of their hand and can really chop things up for them. But obviously, kind of be mindful of exactly your attacks and your board, of course. But I want it to be hard for them to keep that kid. And as long as there's not a blocker there, right? If there is a blocker, then you kind of got to chip in, or if you can't deal with the blocker, then it's quite a bit more annoying. But these games are going to come down to some close counter, some last turns, some Sanji rush, some lost my whole train of thought, some Roger wins maybe. Gear 5 too. One thing I haven't really mentioned here with Gear 5, Gear 5 can be phenomenal if they only leave 1 Don open. Because they need 1 Don, right, to do their effect. That's how their effect works, obviously. But if they leave 2 Don open, they do get to do it on both turns. So Gear 5 can be a little bit of bait, or just be mindful of that. If they have 2 Don, or if they have a Don open when you play your Gear 5, they may hold it for that last swing. So um, just something to be aware of, right? Some players will hold up 2 in the late game given the opportunity. It can be kind of hard, obviously, if they don't have a Cavendish to continue to play their threats and hold open 2 down. But some of them will try or will do that if they know you have a Gear 5 in hand, especially, right? And another section that we are adding to these matchup guides, and I'm actually going to do a standalone video on this because it's very hard to kind of summarize because this is so extraordinarily situational of when to take life and when not to take life, right? Obviously, assuming you have the counter and resources, right? If you have no counter, then you take the life, right? Not really much of a decision. But if you have this, when are you countering? How concerned are you about your life? Things like that. When to block with your face is my title here. So in this matchup in Bonney, we're talking about Bonney exclusively. More important than almost anything else in the world, to me, is making sure I have a curve. So if I don't know what my next two turns are going to be, I'm probably going to take it. I might even take the first two life, really, to this end if I'm like, try because the matchup's bad. You need to play out effective cards, so it's worth it. So that first one, like again, if I unless I know exactly what cards I'm playing for the next two turns and I have counter for it, I'm taking that first hit. As we get into the late game, very interesting kind of decisions can come up depending on how they curve out and what cards they play, right? The thing that I'd say here is keeping your hand size up is going to be very important. Um, they are going to develop into, I mean, right, the deck list that I showed that was top 8 at Nats, they have 8, 10 cost in 11K or 10K and 11K bodies. Um, you're going to need those giants in the late game, but you're also just going to need a healthy hand size because they are going to continue to pressure out good sized bodies, 6K bodies. They're going to pressure you. And as much as I do say my tagline for this deck is you want to be violently efficient with your counter, this is a matchup where if they Hody in the mid game or they Don up and you can just take a giant to keep your hand up and healthy at like 6, 7, 8 cards and you have something to pitch, I would take that opportunity over just going like a 2-1. Because as this game grinds out, they're gonna end up not committing Don until lethal effect. Like that wording is kind of hard to like articulate but if you're playing against good Bonnie players, the way that they pilot this end game is they're going to grind the game to until they feel in control enough to basically have guaranteed lethal. Or they think there's no way they live any longer, right? They kind of desperation go for kill, right? But they are looking to math you out and they will continue to block her up, swing into your board, make it awkward until they get to that end state that they're confident in. So if you can attack their hand early, that's amazing. But if you want to stay up on resources with them as you progress into that late game, with that late game as well, and Hody's being a part of their kind of win condition and game plan, um, look for ways to weave in Roger, right? I've had a couple games where they have a Hawkins on board. I'm looking for kind of pressure. I use my Sanji from hand to rest the Hawkins, swing in to get them down to 0 life and a little bit of counter, and then I hold up like 4 Don, so that I can um, just be safe from Hody and any crackback, maybe even keep a block, if I had a blocker, great. Um, and then I have Roger for the next turn with whatever characters I get to unfreeze, right? Assuming if they Hody, then or not Hody, if they Dopey, then they Dopey. But if they try to counter all in me with a Hody, I'll be very strong off with my Don, at least showing giants or assuming I have multiple giants in hand. So again, I hope this thought process as far as how you're taking your life is helpful. Again, I am going to try and do a standalone video with this. I think this is another one where like specific gameplay examples and kind of thought process is just kind of the best thing. So I think that's also kind of where some people do. I do see some people get some value from coaching from in some scenarios, but um, yeah, from here we're going to go into 3 games where we've kind of get to inch out those victories over Bonnie. My buddy Teddy came over for a couple games. Strong pilot on multiple decks. He's in our Discord. You can chat with him about getting beat up by me as well. But yeah, let's jump over the gameplay, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you want to see the rest of the Nationals topping leaders with matchup guides and then some more more RP Luffy content, some more green purple Luffy content in the future, some more blue purple Luffy content in the future. Please subscribe below. Gear 5 Productions, Days Pirates. We want to grow an awesome community here. So yeah, that'll kind of be my conclusion. We'll go over into the games, y'all.
Yourself.
We'll search this time. So you go.
We got a game here.
No search this time. So
So I'm going to turn it down. I am going second. I believe we both kept. He just swings an 8. Again, one thing I am, wanting to talk about, I'm gonna have a separate video and kind of talk about within each game and a little bit more is taking life. When do you want to protect it? How hard do you want to protect it? That early 8, unless you got perfect counter in hand, I almost always just take when it's a Don up in. It depends a little bit on the matchup, right, where they can try and rush past you. Bonnie's not a deck that's going to want to. I mean, I don't know if any deck wants to put 5 down on their leader and swing on turn 2, but like Anel's going to do that a little more often than Bonnie. Is what I'm trying to get at.
6 in the lead. 4. Using the number 4. Pass.
2 on curve, which is actually what we want to see.
I will play Royal plus Baby. Were you standing on Sega?
Then he's on a Rouge, like I said. And then he also got to just play out the Searcher and have a standing Dom because of the Rouge. Again, better Bonnie players than us maybe can tell us why. But we're saying everyone wants to go first, and pretty good turn to play. So then yeah, Beckman just sniping the Rouge. If he was on 5 down, went right into Cavendish there, that would have been even better for us. He just temples out a Hody here. And he kind of ends up mentioning that he's. Yeah, I was mad about that. I was like, I want to counter that, but the 5K is not. So like, kind of funny thing, right? Is like sometimes you can block like counter for this and make it unfortunate for your opponent. Like they have to commit in a way, but because we're a 6K leader, we really don't get to get as much advantage from that. Like this Bonnie swing can't do anything besides go into Mr. 2. So there's just.
So like I could protect it, but like then you just swing 5.
I just want to make sure this isn't too loud over top of me. I'm just going to kind of mute our voices here. I don't want it to kind of disrupt things. I know someone mentioned that. I do kind of want a little bit of it, right? He does swing in the Hody. I don't have counter for it. So I do end up taking that there as well. I think I had no 2Ks here, if I'm recalling correctly. On the sim games, it's a little bit easier to kind of talk about counter in hand. And yeah, I had no 2Ks. Very awkward, bricky hand. I also had 9-cost Linlin in because I watched Igman's video before I started this game. So I was kind of hoping to get a little value out of that and kind of test out of that. I am up to 10 down here. And now I'm debating between 9-Lin and Newgate. And luckily he does not have leader effect, so I'm going to get value out of that. I also had 1 5-cost Rush Luffy in instead of 2 Gear 5s in this list because I was, again, just watched Jigman's video. 7 into Baby 5 was really annoying. Then we do go into an 8K leader because he has the Hody on board, and you just have the 2K out of that. I think he was feeling the pressure of taking that Hody life, that he didn't want to take another hit there. He does go Hody into face. Which Hody into Beckman may have been a little bit better there for him, honestly, but if I have a 2K there, then I may have just thrown it for it. Which I did, but I probably would have. Oh yeah, this was a slight misplay on my part. I was wanting to get value out of this Frankie, and trying to get the like play with the Sanji, where you get to down -2, your opponent's at 10, you're at 8, now your Sanji is 3 cost. But my opponent was only at 9, and I was at 9, and then I went down to 7. So that's not how that works. Not the worst, but yeah, after I cycled, I was like, oh wait, I don't get to play my dude. So I could have used more down. But be able to say I was playing around. And then I had a queen, so I could have just played queen before the Frankie or instead of the Frankie. But you go double blockers here with one Don open. Again, slightly playing around Hody, giving kind of the opportunity where I'll get to Gum Gum Giant if he does rest both my blockers. Doflamingo, again, kind of being an extra swinger and blocker, is pretty nice for this deck, in my opinion. I do block with the 9 going into Beckman, and then he shanks away my Newgate. Pretty tough. 2 blockers. Have another Newgate. Still have that 9 win. Being pretty hard here. Just kind of pressure down hand. He goes to rest down my queen, which is a little nerve-wracking. I think I end up playing the 9 one here, maybe. Oh. Well, if I'm going to play the 9 win, then I swing first. Block 1K. I do pitch the 5 cost Luffy just to gain a life. 2 Don open for Giants. I did not elect to put anything into his life. I was debating putting Dofi into life because it is a blocker, but I just didn't want to deal with it. And again, if he puts me to 0 or I put him to 0, I do have the opportunity to go for a Roger. 7 in the lead. I have the 2K for that. 7 in the lead. I take that one. I do Giant just in case he's going to try and Hody me. And it's just kind of effective here. Then I think this 11 was into Beckman, question mark. Okay. Then a Hawkins is tough stuff for me. So in here, I am kind of considering how I want to pressure versus potentially, try and pressure him down to 0, basically. I think the consideration here is kind of like interesting where how many cards he has in hand versus what he might be willing to commit to a block with Hawkins, right? So we just go with 9, and he does just take the block with Doflamingo. It's kind of funny because I think I was considering gonna play Beckman. Like I was thinking I was gonna Beckman to trash that Doflamingo, and then he immediately blocked with it, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe could have done that first. But it was fine. Yeah, I did just go for the Sanji. Played the Sanji, I think.
It really like Mighty Game my favorite leader right now, but like he gave purple nothing but stupid rush dot deck. Like no trigger. I will pass it. Oh my god.
Now again, I have 3 Don and a blocker, so if he plays a Hody, exactly that. He rests, you know, my blocker and 1 Don. Now I still have 2 Don available for my Giants and Liv getting out. 2K out of a 7. He runs in at 8. And I realize it's all Don, so this is an interesting thing, right? So at this point, he swung 8. He has 8K Hody, 8K Hody, and a Shank still to swing. So his swings are all face up, right? Now we know all the numbers. So this means, I I 2-1 here because I kind of have it. He swings another 8, and I could giant out of this, but it'd be slightly inefficient, and I need to min max my numbers here. And I can't be inefficient at all. So I take that. I do get another 2K. So now I go 2-1 out of the Hody with the 2K that I got out of life because I was patient there. I now have a giant still when he swings in, and I go, all right, that's my whole hand. Let's see what I get. And it's kind of funny because I flip 2 and I think I don't get enough counter. I think, but it was 2-1. I needed 2K or 2 1s, and I got 2 1s, and that was exactly out of counter. And then I win on the crackback with my turn. Like, it's funny because I kind of put my hands on like, oh no, I didn't get it, but we did get there. So grindy game. The two Hodies and pressure did kind of make it awkward for him. He was running out of cards in hand. He had a lot of bricks. Um, so we were just kind of able to grind out in this particular scenario. So on to game 2.
Your five is obviously gonna be
Go first.
Alright.
Look,
Again.
look at 6. We'll just second one.
So in this match, this one I did go first.
Go for it, yeah. Please go.
So I actually did look at one too many, so I did have him just kind of shuffle that in.
Just so when you search with that law, you can't grab.
Just because it's a low, then grab a Frankie.
And I did have the one of Frankie in at this time, so I did
Yeah,
grab
that's
my
what I
one
was
of
thinking,
Frankie.
like, totally thinking I was about to do like the Sanji for 3 cost, and I was like, stupid brain.
Rosie good?
You can make a Robin.
Yeah, bro.
I should have put in one of Robin before you got here.
Honestly, my list is so anti-Dofi that I'm just blocking.
I was
straight up
joking
on this
about
bitch, bro. I'm over here like
one cost Robin being an addition here as well. Oh, I am gonna have to edit in probably 2 of the cards. The Robin is also solid tech for this matchup. Just being able to snipe those Rosatus.
Like, everyone wants to go first meta. Why would I cut the best pro second card in the deck? Like, oh, you're Dofi? Cool.
The same thing we're talking about Arouge. Everyone wants to go first. Turn 2, it is just very solid. Great tempo for him.
I'll just lead swing to 0. 6. Yep. I'll take that hit. Throws worth it.
And then I do decide to go for double ramp here. I think. I just swing with the Nami. No, yeah, let's go for the Nami. I was debating a Mr. 2, but because I did have the extra swinger, I did just go for 2 6K swings to kind of get some pressure on.
Let's go 5 and 4.
I need to re-sleeve my Afro sleeves. It's starting to get a little wavy, a little dirty. I got a whole nother sealed box and then some, so maybe I should do that after this. I finish recording this. I'll make sure it's upload. Then yeah, the Bonney here. So again, not everyone's on this Bonney, so maybe you can say, oh, it's because he's playing bad cards. I got some wins. No, I'm just kidding, but I don't think that's the case. But this Bonney knocks me off playing a 9 cost here. That's so good.
They really made Mono Blue Tempo in one piece, and there's no other archetype.
He's joking about how Dopey's mono blue tempo from Magic.
Unbanned Sakazuki and all this, or just create an eternal format where you can ban Dofi and people still play Dofi, but they're facing all on Sakazuki now.
Wasn't a Newgate here. This bitch turned off my Newgate.
Also, kind of funny that Sakazuki would play Kaido 9 cards, so you just go cool. Cycle 1 out of 2 break.
7 into a Rouge. Did go Mr. 2 into Frankie. I do think this is a very solid like this is a deck that the blocker plus Mr. 2 can be pretty good. Because going into these later turns, they might play a 10K, an 8K, an 11K. And then also having multiple swingers is very efficient and annoying for Bonnie. This is a deck that you really want to value going wide, kind of like Blackbeard in that sort, that you do kind of want to go wider. Oh, yeah, I didn't have music going this entire matchup, God. Do you guys like having a little bit of background music? If you're still here with me, hit me in the comments with that. The Doflamingo again coming out being another blocker. It is kind of interesting too, like you mentioned here with like playing the Rouge and using it as a swinger as well, like especially with like the Doflamingo alongside it, but like it still functions kind of as a blocker by making your opponent swing into it. And anything you swing into it, even if it's only a 5K, you get to rest another thing. Like Bonnie makes you swing with the biggest attack first, and maybe that's something I should have iterated a little bit more early on. Is that your sequencing with attacks do become really relevant. You basically always want to swing biggest first, which is the opposite of how most other decks, like math wise, that's just how it doesn't work that way, really, ideally. And we do go another 7 into a Rouge, I think we hear. Oh, 8 into a Rouge, yeah. I rest Beckman. I think with the Mr. Two, I do go for value here. Yeah, go to pressure down. See that? Again, kind of if at this point he's in the down range where like he could if I don't swing with it, he could just Hody and answer it in another way anyways. About my next turn. I think my hand here is it's two giants, a Roger, and Newgate. And yeah, 10. He freezes with the carrot and establishes a blocker. So I just take the opportunity to swing in for 8 without the Newgate being frozen or rested down. And the fact that I did end up playing like a little bit wider here ended up being very beneficial to me over where had I had just had the opportunity to Newgate the prior turn, I could have been a little slower. Like the turn that I played my blockers. Or the blocker. Jeez. I did swing into it just to try and get another counter out of my hand. I thought he still had that Doflamingo in hand. He expected to keep it. Or still have that in hand. A whole bunch of 6Ks. I'm swinging, or I did end up getting a few counters off my last few draws, which is nice. He does have a lot of 6Ks here. I had to start with 10, see what he does. But he's going to prioritize resting my blocker or my leader. He does a strict block. Black queen, cycle. Drew 2 counters there, so I was kind of debating, do I want the Sanji? I get rid of the Sanji because then I can just hold up. I have Uso Hachis and they're 2Ks instead. And I have some board. Yeah, I did end up swinging with the Frankie. So I get to leave up a good amount of down for my Giants anyways if he does get to turn lethal. And we do get to pressure him down to 0 here. Like, had I developed the Newgate a little bit earlier, I wonder if he would have been more inclined to run in the Shanks or a Doflamingo, which would have been quite a bit worse for me. Now he's on 0 life. I believe he goes for a headline, if I recall correctly. I take this. So I'm not really feeling the pressure. I'm kind of thinking if he just blockers up by Roger here. He goes all in. I still have a blocker and a keep the Frankie frozen. Plays kid. Swing 7. Restand. I do 2K. At this point, this is his last swing, so I just take that instead of gianting. And he plays kid, plays Rosie over the Bonnie. Now, frozen Frankie, we untap. I think he has 4 or 5 cards in hand. And we basically just math here. We say, if we go 4 onto Newgate, Newgate is then 14K and KOs the Rosinante on attack. That would require 1 2K, 2 2Ks, 3 2Ks, and a 1. So that's 4 total cards out of his hand to protect that kid. If he does that, I'm sad. No, I just try and shell up for a turn, or I swing 8 with leader in at that point probably. But if he doesn't, which he, spoiler alert, doesn't in this case, I then have 12 with my leader afterwards, which is an even bigger swing to get through. So, assuming he can't counter out of this, or doesn't counter out of this, we are then in very good shape to kill with 12, and he did brick up pretty well. And I had so much counter. So, when you were talking about last turn, had he just donned up and went all in, would he have killed me? I don't believe so. Based on the fact that I had the 2 giants still, I was just so defensively effective there. That was a relatively, I mean, to be fair, he didn't get to go straight into his top end the way that you'd kind of want to, but he did develop some good bodies and create pressure, and we were able to kind of fight through that. So let's go to one last sim game here for the video. All right, finally someone besides Teddy. We got one sim game here to wrap up. Real quick, I did elect to go first in this case. I think I was still kind of toying with going first for a second here. And they mulliganed. I elect to keep. Wait, I elect to keep that? Hmm. Let's say I got a mulligan that. Maybe I was optimistic because I had the Beckman, but sucks. Now with absolutely nothing going in the background. Kind of feel like I should have had the music on, but we've gone this far with none, so I'm just not going to pull it up now. We did get the chance to. I was confusing myself because I thought they had searched, but they didn't. Then here we do search the Luffy, so we do have a curve, which is nice. Then we do have another Nami here too to also be able to check the leader, which is great. Early Rosinante is kind of annoying at this point, really. And now we're at 5 down. Don't really have anything besides a queen we can develop. Oh, do not do this to me right now. Come on now. I've been crushing it today. So I do just run that queen out. I was kind of hoping that they would rest down my queen instead of the Nami. And then they didn't even really use they didn't use the block or anything, so I didn't really matter. But either way, I figure I'm gonna counter out if they swing into the queen. Realistically, I probably shouldn't have even exposed it into that, because if they swing into the queen hard, it's a little bit more annoying. But I'm glad they swung into my face there, so I do get to take a life. And that was the reason I actually took that life. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about life management and situational. The reason I took that life is because I only had one 2K. And it sounds like a small thing, but it can make all the difference. And I just wanted to hang on to that 2K just in case, down the road it became a little bit more important. It's our first life. We're in a good spot. So that was why, like, if we're playing against Dofi, right, we 2K that every single time because they're gonna go wide, poke us wide, and they have pudding, right? Green has nothing to punish here. If you're playing against like purple, maybe you need to think about purple law, right? But here there's just nothing to really be concerned with. So I think that's a pretty fair take. They rest down Nami again, and I do just have the Beckman to answer the Cavendish. Huge, right? Love having that opportunity. That makes it such a world of difference going into their later turns, right? If they had a Cavendish here, their kid is fully online. And actually, I think I do this here. I misplayed as well, just to kind of call it out. I rather firmly believe I should have established my 9 cost Luffy, and I believe I end up playing out the Sanji here. Just a little bit. Keep this rolling. I don't have to cut this. But yeah, I get greedy. I get really greedy, wanting to kind of answer this, and it's just not necessary. I should have held the Sanji for next turn, ran out my Luffy, swung wide, and just went 6, 7, 10 at life, and then had that 10K character for kid next turn, and have the Sanji still in hand to arrest any other blockers that come down. Um, I guess the hypothetical concern to keeping the Sanji in hand and leaving the Rosinante is if they have a secondary blocker here, the Sanji might not be enough. So maybe my play wasn't as bad as I kind of initially tagged it personally. But at the time, I kind of remember thinking, like, I think that was pretty inefficient and probably less than ideal. Um, I think, yeah, like Rouge, and I don't remember if they play another blocker. Um, but yeah, I guess if I leave the Rosinante up, and that's not that much better off, I guess. And then again here, this is where we talked about with the life too. This 8K, cycling this giant right now is good for us. It keeps us fresh on hand instead of going down 2 cards in hand. Um, and then also it kind of Hody proofs us, right? We don't want to be sitting with 3 giants in hand or cycling into our third and fourth giant when we're playing against Hody. So taking this opportunity to keep our hand up at 6 cards, or I think it ends up at 5. I do think ends up being pretty ideal. I do end up pitching the Luffy here because the Beckman is going to help me answer the Arouge and help me push through here. And a 9 cost Luffy, I run 3 of them. It's searchable. It's a brick, so I just kind of figured get it out of there. Relatively speaking, I'm not under that much pressure. Actually, it was either 2K Giant or Luffy, right? So, no, I think that was just right then. I don't really have any problems with that. But yeah, we do just immediately answer. So this is a little bit of a nerve-wracking play for my position. It was just kind of the best option that was presented, right? Get rid of the Arouge, so there's nothing more to think about there. With the fact that this is an 8K body, the 3 Dom that's left over is a little bit awkward for our 7K swingers, and they're effective here. So I just go 10 in, right? It's kind of the only option in my opinion. And if they counter out here, then they're low on hand size, which we like. But they don't, so they do end up being swung into. They did have 1 2K, so maybe they just didn't want to give up 2 cards. But yeah. And I do end up kind of realizing that this maybe isn't the most optimal list or player per se. But I don't know. It is something that could come up. It's a rest card. I'm not exactly sure why they played it. Besides maybe just get out of hand. Um, So maybe this is, not the most reputable deck list per se. But relatively speaking, every other card we've seen before this is, pretty stock and standard, right? This is kind of the first thing that threw me off a little bit. And to that end, this list also, one thing that does happen for Bonnie and, one of our quote unquote win conditions against them is they do have the potential to kind of brick up, right? When we went through that deck list, I went through at least 12 bricks. I mean, they're on something like 15 bricks, maybe even more. So like that can definitely happen to them. And then yeah, he's kind of ended up calling it out here. I start mathing out what's happening, and I didn't realize like he was just kind of completely bricked up, but I'm kind of hard going through my math here of oh wow, the quality just dipped there. Go 7 in because it requires 2 cards out of him, and then I commit harder with my after I rest this blocker. I was kind of playing around the kid or the killer and when he might block with it, and the Usohachi kind of hard seals it for me to be able to push through. So, relatively speaking, the straw sword is kind of not the most consistent or the most common play, and I think he ends up having like an Arc Noah in hand too. So, you know, maybe if those were other cards for him to play through, it could have been a problem. But I mean, those are all other cards that are stock standard, and everything that hit the board is stuff you'd be kind of expecting to see. So, sorry about a little bit of lag on this last video. I did it all the same way, so I'm not sure why this one didn't load up quite as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's go edit this all together, and we'll talk to y'all soon.